Hi guys, welcome to Windsome Cottage Garden. My name is Hannah and I'm so glad that you decided to join me today. I mentioned in my last video, I just got back from a trip to England. 3 of my siblings and 1 of their partners and I all went to England to visit family. My dad is English, if you didn't know, and my grandfather is turning 90 later this year, so we went to celebrate him. We'll be back on Monday with our regular content, but I thought I would kind of pop in here with some highlights of my trip. The first of which is Bath. I'd never been to Bath. I've been to England many a time, visiting family and getting to see other areas of the country. But Bath was a place I'd never really visited. If you're familiar with Jane Austen's works, there's a couple of books that are set in Bath, and the movie adaptations are all filmed there. You'll see some of the iconic buildings. You'll also get to see the Roman bath, which gave Bath its name. And honestly, this was an unexpected highlight that I just want to give a 2-cent plug for, because I've seen the picture of the bath, which I'm including some video here, but it was so much cooler, the museum that they've put together. Modern day Bath was built on top of some Roman ruins, including this quite detailed bath infrastructure, which was not just a cleaning facility, but was actually a center of worship. This bath was built on top of a hot spring where they worshipped a number of gods, including Athena, which they'd kind of combined with a local goddess, and Poseidon. A lot of these ruins actually exist under the city today, and so you could go and see the baths, which were pretty well preserved, as well as some of the structure of other parts. And they've taken so many things out of the baths that people put in there, including my favorite thing was a collection of curses. What these curses were letters to the goddess from everyday people, which made it so interesting, where it was people said, hey, someone stole my bathrobe, or someone took this ox. Who was it? Here's who I suspect. Please punish them. And they wrote it on lead paper and threw it into the water for the goddess. They've been able to be pulled out and translated. Also had a lot of other things there. So it was a really cool museum with a great audio guide included in your admission that I highly encourage everyone to go visit if you see Bath. Another thing that we did there, we went to a place called Prior Park, which I will insert here. Some of the things that really cool about Prior Park is that it was the gentleman who owned the quarry where most of the limestone was mined to build Bath, owned Prior Park, and he built it, the house that is, to kind of showcase what the stone could do, because he was one of the first people to quarry it. People saw it, thought it was amazing, and then they ended up building much of the rest of Bath, and it became a real social center for the aristocracy during the Regency period. So Prior Park was really interesting because it was a privately held house that has since been turned into a school, and the gardens were allowed to really fall into disrepair. They're more of like a park-like garden. So I'll just kind of pop a couple of bits in here, which I think show you more of like the grandiose English gardens. The National Trust actually took them over, I don't remember quite when, but I believe it was in the 90s, and they've been restoring it ever since. So we went with my granddad to that, which was really exciting. He, for 89, is pretty active, though we didn't walk back up the hill. It was quite a steep incline. We came in at the top of the hill and then walked half a mile again downhill to get to another bus stop, and just kind of went back into the city there. That was a really fun couple of days that I got to spend with one of my aunts and uncles and granddad in Bath, which was just such a lovely time. After we were in Bath, we left my uncle and granddad and we went into London for a couple of days before returning home. And one of the days we got to go to Kew. One of my cousins joined us, which was thrilling that we got to see him. And I had never been to Kew before. I'd been to London a number of times, but the last time I spent any good amount of time there was actually in a November time frame, so it wasn't a great time to be going to a botanical garden. Though, to be honest, a lot of their things are in glass houses, so it probably would have been. But we got to go this time, and it was spectacular. I don't have a lot of details about the things that I took video clips of, but I thought I would share them with you anyway because some of the sites were just amazing. And if I do have details, I'll pop in with a little voiceover to give you some things. I think the highlight of the trip for me was the water lily house, where we saw 8-foot wide water lilies that were just amazing. 8-foot wide pads, like lily pads, which were one of the coolest things I've seen in my life. And I've seen some pretty cool things, but it's right up there with safari during migration season in my book. So I would love to share with you some of the clips I took. I'll pop in with voiceovers if I have any details about what it is or what part of Kew it's in, but I thought I would just kind of share with you a little bit more about my trip. The first place we visited was the Palm House, which is this giant glass greenhouse here. It was amazing. It is quite literally an indoor rainforest, and they've got so many things in here that it's just so heavy and dense. It was hard to kind of show the true scope of how large it was, so I've just got bits and bops of things. But you can see a fiddle leaf fig right here, and a lot of these are tropical plants, including a lot of items that are actually endangered in the wild or extinct. Others are also things that might be familiar with because they're actually houseplants here, but they've been left to their natural devices in this structure that is so tall. They've got the different sections divided into regions of the world. I think this one is the Australasia section, though I can't quite recall, and I didn't say it in the video. But it was so interesting seeing the biodiversity, while still tropical, from different areas of the world. I should also add that this palm house was the first glass house that was built on the scale. It was actually 2 stories in the centered section, but even though it was so large, it was built originally in 1844 using like shipbuilding designs to make this ambitious sized thing, which is why from the outside it looks a little bit like the hull of a ship. I did not walk up to the second story. I do not like spiral staircases in any form. These looked better than some of the old spiral staircases you'll see in buildings, but it was still quite tight, quite high. I'm also not overly fond of heights. And there were lots of warning signs letting you know that this is a greenhouse and the heat rises. So up top, it would get, I think it said somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius, which I believe is 90 to 105, 110. It was quite warm that day. It was in the 80s. So my brother's partner Rebecca and I kept our feet firmly planted on the first floor, while my more adventurous brothers, Sean and Ian, as well as my cousin Thomas, who joined us for the day, did venture up there. Thomas was kind enough to share some photos with me so that I could share them with you. And we, of course, got the cheeky photos of each other from up above and down below. Right outside the palm house is this more formal installation, which is quite pretty. It's planted mostly with annuals that I could see, including osteospermum and marigolds, both like a multicolored and yellow. It's a little more orange than I typically go for, but I did appreciate the verbena and other elements of purple they added here to help cool it down. It was quite interesting to see. The next place we went was, as I said earlier, the highlight of the Kew visit for me, which was the water lily house. Look at these magnificent water lilies. It was truly awe-inspiring. These things were huge. I'm not sure if this video is quite showing you the scope of how big they really were. They were probably about 6.5 to 8 feet across. And there were obviously other varieties of water lilies in this building as well, but this was just so amazing to see. While we were in there, we were fortunate that someone who was on a tour came in, and I was really appreciative of everyone else who happened to be in the same water lily house, because we all were on the same page. We all kind of quieted down so we could listen into what they were saying. And if I heard what they were saying correctly, the variety that were in there were actually one that had only been discovered 2 years ago. They've always had giant water lilies here, which are native to the Amazon. This in particular was a favorite of Queen Victoria. But 2 years ago, I believe, if I heard this correctly, someone who worked at Kew was in Bolivia, and they saw the variety that is here. And they noticed a couple things, that they thought that this was a variety that hadn't been documented before, so they took some samples, did some DNA testing, and they were right. It was a previously unknown species that was larger than the ones that they've had here. So they brought them back, and they're, documented them and everything. But these were so cool. I'm going to pop up some still photos to show you a couple things. These pads emerged in what, like you can see with the arrow right here, it looks like a mouth, like a monster mouth. They kind of were really tight, so they start out like that. And if you look at this next arrow, this is one that started expanding a little bit more before they reached their full size. The other thing that I didn't realize about the water lily flower was that flowers themselves don't last all that long. If I heard correctly, they only last for 48 hours. They start out when they're bright white, and then they darken a little bit to pink and purple, which will stay that way for about a day. And then so the first 24 hours are bright white, then they start fading a little bit, and then they sink beneath the water. So what they've actually done here is added some floats underneath one that is more than a day old, so it could stay up and we can appreciate the beauty of it. They, in this greenhouse, do hand pollinate all of their flowers, and while these giant lily pads are short-lived perennials, which I think means that they live for 2 to 3 years in the wild, they grow them as annuals there, hand pollinate them all, collect the seeds, and start them again afresh in January the following year. So after the water lily house, we walked over to the Princess of Wales Conservatory, which was so cool. This was a more modern glass greenhouse. Officially opened in 1987, and the Princess of Wales it's referring to here was actually Princess Diana. It includes 10 different climate zones that are computer controlled and perfectly generated to make the plants in those different climates thrive so that they can be studied. It was this massive construction that had different zones for plants, and some of the larger collections of like arid plants, succulents, and cacti. That was so cool to see. There were a number of different zones, as I said, and the first one we walked into was the arid zone, and I just really enjoyed looking at it a little bit more. Similarly to the palm house, this includes different varieties, some of which are endangered in the wild or extinct. And one of the things that I learned later, which I thought was so cool, was when this was built in 1985, Sir David Attenborough, who you might know from his wonderful documentaries, mostly involving wildlife and fauna, buried a time capsule containing seeds of basic food crops as well as endangered species in the foundation of the conservatory, with the idea that in 2085 they're going to be they'll open the time capsule, and the thinking is many of the plants it contains may be rare or extinct at that time, which was a little factoid I found out later that I thought was really, really cool. I should also add that some of these angles are kind of odd because I was trying to be respectful of other people, especially kids. There were so many kids groups there because school was still in session while we were there. And obviously it's a public space, but I wanted to be respectful of them. So if it seems like I'm kind of very much looking at the ground, it's because I was trying to make sure I wasn't including faces and whatnot. But it was actually really fun to see all the kids in the different school groups there. On our way into Kew, we took the tube in from central London, so you can take the district line all the way basically to the end. It ends in Richmond, which is where Kew is located. And actually, I think it's the one stop before the last one that you can get off, and it's just a short walk to Kew. But one of the things the district line does is it goes to different districts, which is how it got its name. So you have to make sure that the train you are going on is going to the right little branch you want to go to. And so the train we were on, we knew we were going to have to get off and shift to a different one. But we passed this group of children, which were probably 5 or 6, and there were 60 of them. And in the UK, when they're that age, they all wear bright yellow highlighter colored vests, and they have to have the buddy system. They also have school uniforms. So there's all these cute little kids in backpacks that match and bucket hats that match with these bright vests on, and they're in the buddy system holding their hands, and there's 60 of them. They had a ton of adults, which, thank God. I'm going to pause on my story really quickly to let you know we are actually now entering into a new zone here. This was a tropical rainforest, so a little bit different than what they had in the Palm House. These were smaller ones and less all around the world, but it was such an amazing thing to see. And they also had a waterfall in here, which was really cool, with some more lilies, and these were the Victoria lily pad types, named after Queen Victoria, who was so fond of them. And right after we saw that, we actually popped into a really small climate that was tropical carnivorous. That was so cool. A lot of these were pitcher plants, different Venus flytraps. To be out of this zone really quickly, and we're going back into a tropical zone with orchids, but I want to finish telling you this one really cool thing I learned in the carnivorous zone I'd never thought about was they had this little thing about carnivorous vegetables, and it made note that things like tomatoes, I can't remember the other one they noted, but they made the note about tomatoes and one other plant, but they secrete a sap that can harm sticky and can potentially harm smaller insects. And one of the things that they've discovered in this zone is that it's similar to carnivorous plants. This secretion can stun certain animals. They don't eat them, but they fall to the ground and in theory fertilize the soil, which gives them strength. And actually, this I think is another climate that we just went through, which was a temperate fern, which was so cool. They had fern trees. I loved it. We'll look at one a little bit more later in a larger temperate glasshouse, but I did want to look at some more orchids before we left because these were stunning. Anyway, going back to the earlier story I was telling about these school children, we passed this horde of children, 60 plus 4, 5, 6-year-olds, which looked adorable with, again, their little uniform, their matching backpacks and bucket hats, and all these adults were with them. And they were chattering, so excited. And Rebecca turned to me as we passed them, and she said, because we'd had another experience the day before with some students on a bus, which wasn't great, and she said, man, I'm glad they're not on our train, but don't they look so cute? And I said, I don't think we've seen the last of them. And sure enough, at the next station, we had to hop off to get on a different train that would go to the space we needed to, because again, you have to make sure you were on the branch that went to the right spot. And it opened up, and we got into the car full of all of these kids. But they were a lot better behaved than the other kids that we'd had that bad experience with. It wasn't a bad experience, it was just frustrating. but they were so excited to go to Kew. And I mean, props to the teacher, because the lead teacher actually had a broken arm. So not only were they, you know, wrangling all these children and their parents who were also helping with the wrangling, but she was doing it with a broken arm, balancing and standing on tube. But they were great. We actually saw them throughout the day, and it was so fun looking at how excited they were about all the different plants. It really speaks to one of Kew's main mission components, which they were actually designated in 2003 UNESCO World Heritage Site. There are over 50,000 plants at Kew, so I got really excited when I recognized one, like this Monstera plant here. But one of the things I didn't realize before I went to Kew was quite their dedication to the science side of things as well, which in retrospect is kind of a silly thing to say, but Kew Gardens and their sister organization Wakehurst, their goal is to understand and protect plants and fungi because they feel that Earth it is in a stage of degradation, which means we're living in a time of extinction, and they want to help preserve plant life and reverse this trend. So they're dedicated to not only housing and protecting endangered species that they could potentially be reintroduced into their natural habitats later, but also inspiring people to help take care of the planet and training future scientists and tenders to help with that as well. After the Princess of Wales Conservatory, we briefly stopped in at their bonsai collection and saw some of the kitchen gardens before honestly taking a break to eat lunch. We were on a mission to find food at this point, so we didn't spend a ton of time there. These bonsais were really cool, though you might note that they were a little stressed and that there is a shade cloth in this space. We came, I think, a couple of days after quite a period of prolonged heat in the UK, heat that they weren't used to. So I think that might be some of the sadness you saw there. I made it a point to stop and smell every rose that we passed. That one didn't really have much of a scent, which was disappointing. The next one was actually a clematis, but I was on a mission to smell the rose that you're going to see in just a second, which is this beautiful pink rose that was stunning. It smelled phenomenal. I found a tag, kind of rooted around until I could find a tag, and this is a David Austin Maid of Kent climbing rose. And sadly, I don't think I can get it in the US, which makes me really, really sad because I literally made a note of it and said I need to find a spot for this. Before we did get our lunch, we got distracted by this wisteria grove, as well as this installation called the Hive, which is meant to simulate being inside a hive. I didn't take any videos. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was focused on food, but I didn't capture a lot, but my cousin did. So again, just wanting to share a little bit more about this, because they were both very cool things. Being inside the hive, there was noise and lights, which is supposed to emulate bees talking to each other and their queen. After we did get that lunch and felt a lot better, we made the trek over to our last port of call before we had to leave Kew, which was the Temperate House, which is the world's largest Victorian glass house that is also stunning. This has in it alone 1,500 species of plants from Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific Islands. So this Temperate House had been closed for a little while, but it reopened in 2018, containing just temperate plants that have to live above about 45-50 degrees to survive. So this Temperate House kind of shows how these 10,000 individual plants help find solution to some of the world's most pressing issues, including climate change and loss of biodiversity and food security. So it was, again, another beautiful thing to walk through. It was also where we got to see some amazing fern trees. I was trying to show you this here, but it was having such a hard time photographing. because of some sunscreen I think I got on my camera. But that little frond is the beginning of a branch, which you can see a bigger curl in here. Then it kind of comes up, and then there's those little fronds on the individual things. So cool. I think these are native to New Zealand, and it's on my bucket list to go there one day to see them and other things in person. Those were the highlights of my trip. I don't have a ton of details of things, but again, I love going to other botanical gardens and learning about the different things, seeing how people put it together. While Kew was once a palace, and I think it's where Queen Charlotte lived for quite some time, it's now held in this botanical garden that you can visit, and it was truly spectacular to see not only the glass greenhouse, the water lily house, but all the different variety of plants that were just so beautiful to see. So I will say this, if you're in London, it is accessible by the tube. You can take the district line towards Richmond. There's actually a stop for Kew Gardens. It's the second to last one. If you buy a day pass, it's in zone 4 still, so you can still access it without any extra, or you can tap in and tap out of the tube system in London. I am not overly familiar with it, but it was pretty easy to do. It was a wonderful trip. I hope you enjoyed these highlights, and I will see you next time with a more traditional garden video here in my garden. I do have to tell you guys, I know I've complained a little bit about the weather this year. We had so much rain while I was gone. Everything has exploded. So I actually have the next video you see will be a very brief one where I just walked through the garden when I came home to show you all the changes that happened in just 10 days from my last video. Shout out to my cousin Thomas for letting me use a couple of his pictures in my video to help explain how some things fit together. And I really hope you enjoyed this highlight trip. I really appreciate you joining me today, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye-bye.